With the new Professor Layton game on the way, I figure now more than ever is a good time to look back at the series. In this video, I'm going to go over what a Professor Layton game is, and how the third game amazed me with its story. If you don't already know, I like to focus my videos to just the storytelling of a game, and I'd like you to hold the presumption that the mechanics work enough that I don't have to critique them unless I go out of my way to. The Layton games originally released as one trilogy, which after a successful launch, they decided to release a prequel trilogy after. I won't be covering the prequels because the conclusion to the original trilogy floored me, and I want to talk about that more. The prequels are more like an additive to that. The finale of the original trilogy and third game, Professor Layton and the Unwound Future, is one of the few games where I felt like I'd seen the conclusion of a properly thought out story. It's the feeling you get after watching a good anime or a good movie, but you know video games can do this too. I wanted to talk about why it was so good, and it's not just because we're both professors. I'll now get right into the first topic, what exactly a Layton game is and why it's good. Let's begin with establishing a definition of good game design. I'm not going to get too technical here, but we all know what good video game design is innately. Firstly, there must be the following for a game to exist. 1. Functional mechanics relevant to the aesthetic or story. 2. An intentful goal of the game or a game loop. And 3. A story, which is optional whether it's told in a narrative or just in the visuals like a Game & Watch title. Now that's how one exists, but I believe all the above points must coalesce to tell a story in order for a game to be good. That is my definition for good game design. That doesn't mean there has to be a complex narrative or even dialogue at all, just that there should be a deliberate context everything exists in. By deliberate, I mean that the story and gameplay do not conflict with each other. It's all one whole experience. Also, I don't mean good in a purely economic sense, because gacha mobile games that rake in endless money through addiction take that title, and big blockbuster titles that can afford infinite marketing are going to do well regardless, either from releasing yearly or from remaking games that were already good. I mean games that people fall in love with, talk about to other people, and last in the public consciousness much longer. The criteria I listed is by no means definitive, but I notice it's a lot tougher for a game to be remembered if it lacks cohesion in these points, or if it's missing a point in general. I would argue, now more than ever, a game has to not just exist, but actually be good in order to survive today's climate, where the limiting factor of physical availability for games is starting to vanish, with everything being digitally distributed and translated into multiple languages. That's why whenever I find games like this, no matter when it was released, I think it's important to bring it up so we can peruse through what makes it a good experience and learn to recognize that when we see it. With that established, let's move on to what exactly the Layton games are. The Layton games are a visual novel point-and-click puzzle hybrid with some animated cutscenes on top of that. I've heard it described as a fever dream of the paper activities you do on a placemat in kindergarten, which is a fair observation. I just see it as the SAT exam with cutscenes myself. Americans will know what that is. Everyone talks about the connection to Sylvain Chomet's art style with Layton, so I'll just say it quickly. It's there. Chomet describes his own style as a French comic book like Asterisk and Obelisk, and that's visible in the Layton games as well. The gameplay for any of the Layton games goes as follows. You read through the story a bit, the protagonists find themselves in a jam, and you must solve a puzzle to continue. These comprise the game's main puzzles and create the core gameplay loop. Most but not all of the side puzzles are encountered by talking to people, learning what their puzzling situation is, solving it, and then receiving thanks for helping them. It's such a simple and obvious way of rewarding the player for completing puzzles. If it's a main puzzle, the reward is continuing the story. If it's a side puzzle, it's the satisfaction of helping someone else. The game takes care to add dialogue after you finish a puzzle to show how you've helped the person out, so that it feels you actually did something rather than just complete an objective. And it is one, because you need to complete a certain amount to progress at thankfully infrequent checkpoints. During my playthrough, I never had to end up backtracking because the stories embedded in the puzzles and the dopamine of solving a hard one kept me wanting to find more. It felt like with each completed puzzle, I learned a little bit more about the game's setting, because solving people's problems is often inherently linked to learning more about them. That is how you connect a game mechanic to the world setting in a way that works, because the narrative of the story in most Layton games is visiting unfamiliar but charming locations to learn more about them in order to solve whatever the greater mystery is. It's an execution of game and story design that benefits both game and story, and I love it. The games also manage to create a feeling of cohesion within the story and puzzles by always showing who's solving the puzzle through dialogue before it switches to the puzzle screen, and then connecting that to who you see at the attempt screen, where there's some tension before you know if you got it right or not. It's such a fun feeling to see whether you got the answer right when played out like this instead of some boring result screen. It creates a natural flow between dialogue and puzzle solving, which creates an amazing feeling of immersion when you complete a puzzle that coincides with what the characters are actually doing. It feels like you did that. That's hard to do in a video game. To circle back to my points from earlier on game design, the Layton games have a decently made puzzle engine that works as the primary mechanic for the game loop, and the plot weaves this mechanic into action as an obstacle to unlock more of the story, which is entertaining enough with its animated cutscenes to warrant continued play. It successfully ties all 3 points together. That's all I have to say about the gameplay, and I now want to cover the story of the original trilogy. Before that though, let's talk about the title quickly. The Layton games have different title localizations depending on the region. For example, Unwound Future in the US is Lost Future in Europe, and Saigo no Jikan Yoko in Japanese, which means The Last Time Travel. This game and one of the prequel titles, Azran Legacy, were noticeably altered from their Japanese counterpart. As for Unwound Future, while the literal translation for this title in Japanese is The Last Time Travel, Japanese actually has an inherent flexibility. They can describe foreign concepts with loanwords like taimu turaberu, or they can use native words like jikan ryoko. The latter sounds textbook-like and wordy, perfect for a puzzle game that'll test your mind. This flexibility doesn't exist in English though, so the local team went for something poetic instead in an attempt to channel the same intention. And for Azran Legacy, it uses a word that's common in manga for advanced civilizations but just doesn't exist here. Just wanted to explain that because it's a natural point of confusion. I mean, look at what this guy had to say about it. It sounds better in Japanese, that's all. Now here's where I'm going to go over the trilogy. The first 2 games are rather simple mystery stories, and while I have a lot of love for them, I also believe I'd be wasting your time analyzing all of the games, and want to save that for Unwound Future, the last one. I'll do plot summaries instead for Curious Village and Diabolical Box, the first 2, and you can skip them if you want at these timestamps if you've already played either of these. This is the first game, Professor Layton and the Curious Village. Herschel Layton, a mystery-solving professor known in the newspapers, and his apprentice Luke Triton have received a letter to solve an inheritance dispute. The Baron of a small village has died, and left his huge fortune to any who could locate a treasure known as the Golden Apple, residing in the village. Layton was requested by the wife of the Baron, Lady Dahlia, to find the Golden Apple. Upon the two's arrival to the Baron's manor, a mysterious figure crashes into the village and the Baron's nephew gets murdered. To make matters worse, one of Lady Dahlia's servants, Ramon, has gone missing. A police inspector from London named Chelmy arrives to the town and starts his own criminal investigation into the murder, suspecting everyone including Layton. While that's going on, Layton and Luke continue to look for leads on the location of the Golden Apple, picking up clues on the way for a larger mystery that encompasses the entire village. One such clue is that a cog of unknown origin was found next to the murdered nephew. And the second clue is that Lady Dahlia has the exact resemblance to the Baron's previous wife, Lady Violet, yet the two are not related. After trailing leads around town, Layton and Luke find out from a cafe owner that there's the rumor of an old man kidnapping people, and that's likely who's taken Ramon. The two then explore at night and manage to sight the man carrying Ramon towards the giant tower at the far edge of town. Upon rushing back to the manor to alert Inspector Chelmy and Lady Dahlia of the kidnapping, Layton is interrupted by Ramon returning in perfect health. At this point, it seems like this kidnapping and returning seems to be a common occurrence in the village, which many residents have seen happen but none seem to actually care about. This appears to be one more clue to the mystery of the village. Chelmy warns Layton to work on the Golden Apple case and leave the crime solving to him, which, he is the police officer here. So back on that trail, Layton and Luke are told about the Baron's journal in Lady Dahlia's room and are invited to look through any clues that may be present in it. In the Baron's journal, we do find an entry about a craftsman's work on something that resembles his deceased wife, Lady Violet. The Baron had altered the memory of whatever this vague thing is because he realized there can only be one Lady Violet. It should be obvious what this is talking about. Moreover, he expresses his desire that the people of the village will look after his daughter Flora once he's deceased, and that he's leaving everything in the hands of his old friend, hoping the seeker of the Golden Apple will be the one to grant his dying wish. With this, Layton and Luke gain a vital clue that there's an old friend of the Baron who must still be around, as well as Flora, the Baron's daughter. During the investigation into the matter of the old friend, Layton is given a vase by a villager who mistakenly believes it belongs to him. But it turns out they were told a lie by the shadowy figure who crashed into the village earlier, who for some reason wanted Layton to touch the vase. After the vase event, Layton runs into a man who believes he could be the old friend, as he visited the manor often and even has the Baron's old desk. We're allowed to investigate it and find a map that could lead to the Golden Apple. Layton finally surmises that the mystery of the village has to do with the giant tower. So we head over there and run into a small girl who drops a ticket to the town's park. With no way into the tower, Layton takes the ticket as a lead. After unlocking the park by finding its caretaker, the duo explore and get chased down by a Ferris wheel which breaks open a path underground. It's a failed attempt by the shadowy figure to get rid of Layton, using a remote that unhinged the wheel and sent it rolling. Within the underground path is a key to the tower, so it's finally time for them to head back there. Layton, however, is then summoned by Chelmy, and it turns out the vase from earlier is a vital piece of his recreation of the murder. The murderer's weapon was the vase and Layton's fingerprints are on it. Very bad news. Layton is accused of being the murderer at first, but Layton points out major flaws in Chelmy's act to uncover the truth. This isn't the real Inspector Chelmy, but a criminal in disguise. He's a man named Don Paolo, who Layton knows and tells Luke that he was rejected by proper scientific institutions on his behavior but remains esteemed as a genius. Layton has no idea why Don Paolo hates him so much, but the man flees on getting found out, so they're free to go to the tower now. Inside of the tower, Layton and Luke find a man named Bruno, who was the same man found kidnapping Ramon earlier. Layton talks with him and puts together that the mystery is that all of the village residents are robots, and Bruno is maintaining them to keep them functioning. The whole village and its puzzles are tests made by Bruno and the Baron posthumously in order to test the wisdom of whoever comes looking for the Golden Apple, and Layton must overcome the final puzzles of the tower in order to reach the said prize. Now with this, we know the nephew of the Baron who was killed was actually just malfunctioning. The cog found by the nephew was a piece from him, and Lady Dahlia resembles Lady Violet because she's a robot made in her image with altered memory. With the mystery of the strange town solved, now all that's left to do is reach the top of the tower and see what the Golden Apple is. After doing so, Layton and Luke discover the girl that they ran into earlier at the base of the tower. Her name is Flora Reinhold, and she's the human daughter of the Baron. Layton, Luke, and Flora have to escape the tower after being targeted by Don Paolo once more, and successfully do so before he demolishes the tower.
Layton, I'll smash you right out of the sky! No! This isn't over yet, Layton! Just you wait! One day, I will have my revenge on you! Hold tight!
Layton witnesses an apple-shaped mark appear on Flora's neck as she hugs the professor and laughs, realizing that there's one more mystery to solve. They head to the manor, and Luke finds a button in the painting of Flora at the location of the apple mark, which unlocks a secret room where finally the Baron's inheritance is revealed. This activates an audio recording of the Baron intended for those who solve the puzzle, finally shedding a light on the point of all of this. The Baron intended for the village and its residents to be constructed in order to protect and keep Flora company until she was old enough to be ready for the real world. The point of the puzzles was to find a suitable guardian for Flora, and had the last mystery connected to her lap to make sure it was someone who could make her happy. Upon taking the fortune, the village will have served its purpose and all of the robots will cease to function. Layton gives the choice to Flora, who decides to leave the treasure in order to keep the village alive and thank the robots who raised her. Layton and Luke decide to keep their story of the village hidden in order to protect Flora from the press, and to keep people from seeking out the treasure as well. So my thought about this game is that, despite the silliness of the storytelling at certain points, the overall story is one that's really touching. The idea of a rich baron building a village of robots to keep his daughter from the harm of the real world would be troubling in real life. But for a cartoonish game like this, it feels emotional because we know the world we're watching here is a few degrees removed of our own reality. It's more like hyperbole, like a giant metaphor for familial love, and I think that's why the story has such a striking emotional core. The only thing that actually bothers me about the logic of the plot is that the Baron had his old friend Bruno maintain the village robots instead of just giving the fortune to him and having him be Flora's legal guardian. I imagine there are numerous explanations though, with the easiest being that Bruno preferred making a cool-ass robot village. Flora becomes a recurring character now that Layton is her legal guardian, so with that, let's move on to the second game, Professor Layton and the Diabolical Box. Diabolical Box is a little bit different from Curious Village. It's an equally short story, but with some more subplots and complication to it. There's more locations and intrigue. The story begins with Layton receiving a letter from his mentor Dr. Andrew Schrader on the topic of an ill-boding artifact, the Elysian Box. He tells Layton about a rumor regarding the box that those who open it will die on the spot, and that despite his disbelief, tells Layton anyways in the rare chance something happens to him. Layton, and his apprentice Luke tagging along, heads out on his intuition that something might have happened to Dr. Schrader. Upon visiting his apartment, they find a locked room crime scene where Dr. Schrader appears to be dead and the Elysian box is missing. Layton, though, deduces that there's more to the incident when he finds an escape route left by a possible perpetrator. Police Inspector Chelmy arrives as well, and if you watch the last game synopsis, this time around it's the real one, not a disguise. Layton finds a ticket in Dr. Schrader's hand, which serves as a lead. It's for a train on the Voluntary Express. Layton feels responsible to uncover the truth of what happened to Dr. Schrader as it's his mentor, so he takes the ticket and boards the train. Luke's tagging along once again. One fun fact before we move on. The word Elysian is a reference to the Elysian Plains, which is a Greek afterlife realm that's happy in contrast to the underworld ruled by Hades. They all get on the train and Flora from the first game tags along as well, sneaking on in secret. The train stops in a scenic town named Dropstone for maintenance, a rural location that's brimming with positive energy and agrarian lifestyle. The town happens to be celebrating its 50th anniversary at the moment. Take note of that number for later. Layton decides to begin inquiring about the Elysian box, but this scares off the residents. The only information gleaned out of the town is 1. The wealthiest man of the town, Mr. Anderson, has only heard rumors of the Elysian box, but he knows that his mother, Sophia, had been searching vigilantly for it. She's the founder of the town and died recently. Number 2. Mr. Anderson's daughter, Katya, had been transpiring to leave the town of Dropstone, unbeknownst to him, to fulfill a final wish from Sophia, which would be her grandmother. The importance of these two things aren't going to be apparent, so just keep them somewhere in the back of your head as I continue. Flora gets kidnapped by someone during the crowd of the anniversary celebration and returns to the group. This one's obvious, so I'll just say it here that this is Don Paulo now, and he'll be important later too. As Layton and the rest go back onto the train to head to its next stop, Layton notices that Katya gets on as well, snuck onto the train by Mr. Anderson's workers. They support whatever it is that she's doing that was wished for by her late grandmother Sophia. Layton, Luke, and Flora, or Don Paulo actually, are back on the train, and Layton has a premonition that they should try to make it to the luxury car section, just on his intuition. They make it there, and the conductor arrives, not to escort them back to their own car, but rather to ask for help in the placement of the car's roses. Layton figures out the most efficient way to order them, and upon doing so, gets knocked out by the scent of the flowers. It's not really told what happens here in dialogue, but rather through one of the puzzles. You have to swap the train cars onto different tracks, and that's what happens. They're now on a different train technically, and they get taken to an unmarked town named Folsense. At Folsense, there's a weird phenomena where arriving it seems like the town is dead, but once they pass through the train station, all of a sudden everything's lively. Flora feels ill, and so Layton and Luke find a hotel for her to rest at while they explore. Around town, they find that the citizens of Folsense are gripped by a fear of a vampire living in the Duke's castle. The owner of the Voluntary Express Railway, Mr. Beluga, and his son, the conductor, are arguing around town looking for something that's definitely the Elysian box. So is Katya, who's searching for it for some reason. Then finally, there's Chelmy here, who's been led to the town by his own investigation. Outside the city's museum, Layton spots an emblem on the ground that he has a revelation about. He finds Chelmy, and Layton asks him for a photograph he took at the crime scene. It's a photo of the Elysian box, but it got torn to shreds by a dog in the town, and Layton has to collect it back together. When Layton finally assembles his picture, Chelmy at the same time reaches a critical point in his own investigation and gathers everybody from the train together. He deduces that Sammy, the conductor, Mr. Beluga's son, is the one who murdered Dr. Schrader.
My only crime is rocking, and rocking ain't a crime. Yow! Let me go.
This is wrong though, and Layton has a last-minute revelation through the way of Flora recognizing the goat symbol on the photo of the box, despite there being a missing critical scrap of the photo that Layton lost to rough wind after assembling the entire picture. Layton deduces therefore that Flora is someone in disguise, and the real culprit of robbing Schrader of the box. Lo and behold, it's Don Paulo, as I said, and he found the box while Schrader was already passed out, and that he also left the real Flora back in a farm in Dropstone. Don Paulo couldn't figure out the mystery of the box on his own and wanted to trail Layton in order to run off with any possible reward when he inevitably figures it out. Chelmy and Don Paulo get into a scruff and chase, while Layton finds the Elysian box on the floor where Don Paulo must have dropped it. At this point, Mr. Beluga demands that he be given the box, as he's actually the son of the Duke of Folsens, but the hotel's bellboy suddenly chimes in that Mr. Beluga ran from the town after a disagreement with his father and gave up his inheritance. Seeing that as the case, Layton takes the box and opens it alone with Luke in their room to find it empty. Sammy the conductor thanks Layton for saving him from the false charge by opening the town's museum, as it's owned by his father, Mr. Beluga, letting them learn the town's history. They learned that Folsens was a gold mining town that flourished and enjoyed popularity with tourism, but came to suffer some curse that made most of the townsfolk evacuate. We can see a painting of the Hertzen family. In the painting is Duke Hertzen, Anton, and Mr. Beluga, who changed his last name to get away from his father. Anton is the eldest son, currently residing in the Hertzen castle at the outskirts of town. Said to be a vampire now. The museum curator nudges Layton to visit the mines if he wants to get a first-hand account on what the curse of the town is, and piece together what happened, so they do exactly that. At the mines, Layton finds a miner's journal which tells us that there was a sinister ore mined alongside the gold which caused everyone to get sick. The Duke, however, changed with greed, and forced people to work anyways, causing a massive exodus. Layton then decides the next logical step is to visit the vampire in the Hertzen castle, Anton. The duo sneak in with a carriage that unlocks the gate, and we finally get to see the castle up close. It's quite an ominous looking one, hanging above a mine that burrows into the earth. Anton greets them in his perfectly young visage and invites them to stay the night. Layton and Luke do, but wake up tied with rope, and Anton calls out their foolishness on wandering into a vampire's, really just a crazy dude's house. Layton, however, can easily untie himself and Luke because Anton as a noble apparently never tied a proper knot before. They go to escape through the front door, but Layton says that despite the imminent death in front of them, they still need to figure out what happened to Schrader and close the lid on the mystery of the Elysian box. Luke, however, feels like they should obviously leave. Katya finds them by the entrance and doubles down on what Luke said, which convinces Layton finally that maybe they should escape. While they're running, however, Anton catches them and mistakes Katya for his long-lost lover, Sophia. That's correct, the same Sophia who founded Dropstone and is the grandmother of Katya. This is revealed through an old diary that slowly opens up as the game gets to this point, that Anton had a girlfriend named Sophia who left him and escaped the town and had a family. Anton, currently believing Katya is Sophia, begs for her to return, but she cowers behind Layton in fear. Anton then believes that Layton must have been the lover that Sophia left him for, and they have a sword fight.
I didn't think you had it in you, Mr. Layton.
Layton!
Sophia belongs to me. You can't have her. Ah!
Look out!
Something strange is happening. I just need to catch my breath.
No more! Please, just stop!
What's happened to me?
Are you all right?
Please just stop, Grandfather. Your body can't take it.
What did you say? I don't understand. Sophia, dear.
You haven't figured it out, have you? You really don't know. Then I guess it's up to me to tell you the truth.
She explains to him that the mining town of Folsens was layered in a hallucinogenic gas by the aforementioned sinister ore, and that he is her grandfather. The entire town is unmarked because it's no longer inhabited at all. Everyone who arrived from the Voluntary Express hallucinated the townsfolk and the city lights and, well, pretty much everything. It's actually a ghost town. The gas has some suggestive effect where if you're shown to expect something, your mind will make it real. This is why the train station has photos of Folsens from 50 years ago, so when you walk in, that's what you imagine. And the old paintings of Anton make everyone, including himself, imagine him at that age. This is also why everyone gives Layton and Luke puzzles, because they're always thinking of puzzles and right now they're really high. This news is kind of an enormous shock to Anton, and he doesn't take it well, but they have to leave because in his rage of hearing that Sophia's already dead, he destroys the giant chandelier and the castle begins to crumble. They all escape and the castle's rubble plugs up the mine underneath, which frees the town from the hallucinogenic gas. Anton, as we see, is actually much older. Here, Anton tells everyone the truth of the Elysian box. So let me do my best to explain this whole situation. Anton and Sophia were both lovers 50 years ago when the town of Fulsense was in its prime. Sophia discovered that she was pregnant with Katya's mother and left the town to live elsewhere, which we know is Dropstone. Sophia told Anton that there was another person who needed her more than Anton, and he took this as there being a betrayal with a lover, but what she really meant was that she was pregnant from him and didn't want to harm the infant with noxious gas from the mines. Due to Anton being the eldest son and next in line as the Duke of the town, she knew he couldn't abandon the town, but little did they know how short-lived it would be. To hurt him the least, she figured the only option was to leave and not reveal the pregnancy. The Elysian box was one made from the ore with hallucinogenic gas, and has a hidden compartment that contained a letter to Sophia. Anton figured she never got it due to it becoming a legendary artifact that passed from person to person, but upon Luke solving the riddle and opening the compartment, he finds a new letter by Sophia. Here it is, because this really made me tear up and I want you guys to get the full scene.
My dear Anton, are you well? I received your letter. Though I'd like nothing more than to see you again, I'm afraid I no longer have the strength to do so. You don't know how many times I've thought about you over the years. I often wonder if you hate me for what I did. Do you? When I decided to leave, I was carrying our child. I couldn't bear exposing that tiny life to such danger. I knew your father's position and understood you didn't have the option to leave with me. Even though I did the only thing I could, I'll always regret leaving you that way. But there's one bright spot in this sad story, and that is our lovely granddaughter, Katya. My departure all those years ago has given you the chance to meet. Katya's mother died shortly after she was born, but Katya grew up strong and sweet just the same. She reminds me of you every time she smiles. With her around, I could never forget about you, even if I wanted to. You've been in my thoughts since the day we parted, and now, though my time here is drawing to a close, I like to think we'll meet again on the other side. The thought of seeing your face warms my heart. Be well and be happy, my dear Anton.
Oh, Sophia. I finally understand now.
Thus marks the end of the story of the Elysian box. Anton decides to be a proper grandfather for Katya and lives with her until he can reunite with Sophia in death. Some plot threads are taken care of in the credits, like Layton going back to get Flora and Mr. Beluga and Anton reuniting, which is a nice detail. Also, it turns out in a post-credit scene that Dr. Schrader woke up from the box's gas, so he wasn't actually killed. Layton decides to pay him a visit, and with that, the game ends. Once again, there's some holes in the story like in Curious Village, but for the same reason, it never bothered me. The endings really stick its landing, and there's so much charm in the game's, well, everything. I prefer a story that makes me feel something rather than one that's logically thorough in every minute detail. Now, I hope you enjoyed my summary of the two games. I think they're really amazing, and both made me feel strong emotions on completion. Now I'm going to offer you a summary of the third game, and this one's going to be a little different because I'm going to insert my thoughts as I go through the story. Also, earlier I pronounced it Unwound Future accidentally, but it's really Unwound. I'm sorry, I'm just a silly cat. So let's get into it. The game starts out with an intriguing premise. Layton receives a letter from a person claiming to be Luke 10 years in the future. Anybody normal would find this to be a prank and discard the letter. The two pause at doing that, but decide to investigate further due to its potential relation to an event a week prior, wherein the Prime Minister of London was kidnapped in a seemingly bogus time machine demonstration. The scientist responsible is named Dr. Stongun. Just keep that in mind for later. Right away, we have an interesting premise, and subtly, the writers are making us doubtful of the time travel story. They're doing this by highlighting to us through dialogue the suspicions that Layton has of the letter, and then showing us the demonstration going wrong. If the letter was legit, it could have included something specific only Luke would know, right? So Layton's suspicions are natural. Is this really the future Luke? And was that actually a time machine or a front for kidnapping the Prime Minister? The game puts us right where it wants us. We're coming into the story with our minds alert. Layton and Luke are instructed in the letter to visit a clock shop, where we find the shop's owner was given instructions to let the two see the shop's giant clock in action. First, we need to solve a puzzle to see where the last piece fits, as the owner is old and can't remember where the last piece goes. I don't think he actually forgot where the piece goes, and this is just a test for Layton's identity, but I digress. Upon completion, we get a cool visual of the giant clock at work to turn time forward, and London has transformed. After some exploration, it seems the streets have all warped compared to where we were just at. There's now skyscrapers, or at least the funny Layton equivalent, and the bus stop we were at only moments ago now has a post of discontinued service for a date that should be 5 years in the future. Here we get to one of the great moments of story gameplay cohesion. There's a postman who has a letter for Layton, but will only give it to the real Layton. We need to solve a puzzle where we fit Layton's name in Japanese into a hat. I don't blame them for not trying to make this work with English letters. At this point in the story, we've been hearing a lot of talk about Layton's hat. People are afraid of him. Maybe someone pretending to be him, as the game suggests is a real enough possibility that people need to check his identity. But no, this puzzle doubles down that Layton is inseparable from his hat. To solve it, you fit Layton's name into the shape of the hat. The game is subtly countering the suspicions that it sowed early on by now suggesting to us that the people aren't afraid of a lookalike, but the real Professor Layton in the future. Maybe, perhaps, the pair have traveled through time. It's such a nice little detail. So the letter that the postman gives to Layton tells them to visit Green Hospital, where they're promised to be convinced of their journey to the future. In the hospital, we find Dr. Schrader. Layton's mentor is housed here. He's now elderly and ill, and after greeting him, we find Layton's car in poor shape at the back of the building. It's quite strong evidence of being in the future. Meeting someone we know, I think, would convince most people. Anyways, we find that inside the Layton-mobile, and yes, they call it that like Layton physically beats down criminals, is another letter. Future Luke is now ready to meet us in person after being careful to hopefully sway any suspicion we know Layton has been holding on to. Luke wants to meet us at a hangout in a dangerous casino that's run by a crime syndicate known as the Family, a group that we're told runs the city now because the police are useless nowadays. He has us meet here to show Layton the change that the city has gone through, as there'd never be a casino in old London. But onto our way to the casino, this happens.
Huh?
Layton sees someone he was romantically interested in the past, and wow, can we just talk about how refreshing it is to see Layton out of his professional clothing? This feels more like I'm looking at a person and not just a mascot. This scene sets up an enormously important plot thread for later, so let's just put a pin in it for now. We make it into the casino after Layton snaps out of his flashback, but we don't get past the door without solving a puzzle. The amount of puzzles everyone gives you gets a little bit funny sometimes. It's kind of like talking to people from New Jersey. Within the casino, we finally run into future Luke. He brings us out of range of eavesdroppers and lets us know the reason he wanted to bring Layton here to the future is because an evil genius has taken control of London. At first, our Luke posits that it's Don Paulo. He has the ability to disguise as anyone, which seems kind of silly, but the mystery genre is always full of fun disguise tropes, like the identical twin. But no, future Luke asserts that only Layton has the genius to become the evil mastermind who's warped London and turned it into what it is now. He is the head of the family and strikes fear into the hearts of the public, which is why they all respond with it when they see our Layton's hat. Here's the payoff to the hat puzzle I mentioned earlier. Future Luke tells Layton that the power vacuum resulting from the Prime Minister vanishing, yes, remember that, is what allowed Layton to grab the reins of London. Layton used his genius to take over the criminal underworld, and he employed the scientist from the demonstration Dr. Stongun to begin working on a time machine. The issue with their current time travel appears to be that the traveler cannot pick where the machine leaves them or gets dropped off. It's a wormhole between two random times and two random locations. It's simply by chance that the entrance and exit are in the same clock shop 10 years between our characters and future Luke. Finally, we get from Luke why he wanted us here, and it's to stop future Layton from building a fully functional time machine. Now, while exiting the casino with future Luke, Layton gets stopped by one of the family goons mistaking him for future Layton. He realizes that he's never seen the group before, and an altercation breaks out where they open gunfire in the casino. This is insane. And what happens next is even more insane, and I love it. The name of this puzzle is Slot Machine Gun. This is the most fun I've ever had solving a puzzle. This is peak Layton. Yeah, that's cool as hell. So we make it out of the casino and towards the arcade restaurant to meet with the postman from earlier, who's an acquaintance of Future Luke. He tells us that Future Layton has been using the pagoda in Chinatown, which is a type of tower in Asian architecture you've probably seen before, it's very elegant, to house all the scientists working on the time machine. We head over to Chinatown to attempt entry, and on the way this happens.
Here you go.
What's this now? A hat?
For the newly appointed professor. Very dashing, Herschel. The picture of a true gentleman.
A true gentleman?
No, leave it on. It suits you. It really does. So no taking it off. Oh, look at the time. I didn't realize how late it was. I have to go to the lab. We're running a very important experiment today. Let's continue this celebration over dinner tonight. Oh, and promise me you'll wear the hat. It's not your usual style, but keep an open mind. After all, isn't that what a gentleman does?
Now we see just how important this woman who Layton keeps seeing around town is exactly. She seems to be the one who gave Layton his penchant for embodying the image of a gentleman and never taking off his hat. Suddenly, the traits that seem typical of a static character in him are now given emotional background, and Layton is becoming more understandable. In fact, to the point where we can understand why he might become obsessed with the past as his evil future self apparently is. Onwards now to the pagoda where the scientists and prime minister is being held. Remember the doubts Layton had earlier? Now even he's wondering that the prime minister was time traveled to the future to be kept hostage. The game is taking our skepticism seriously by making everything seem fishy at first, but as we get closer to the midpoint, it appears as though the time travel story is actually real. The writers are aware of what the reader's thinking while playing, and utilizes that awareness so wonderfully here. Anyways, at Chinatown, due to the family guards, Layton, Luke, and Luke fail to get in. Layton, however, is reminded of Chelmy by the guard's appearance, and gets the idea to return to the present. Rather than visit the future inspector, Layton has the idea to visit the one in the present by traveling back through the clock shop wormhole to its other side. The present inspector would have a full recollection of events of the time machine demonstration, surely. Layton finds it odd that himself and Luke, as well as the inspector and his underling, were invited to the demonstration to begin with. After Layton and little Luke return to the present, Layton picks up a notebook at his office for a case he was researching himself, a lab explosion that failed to receive any media coverage, but Layton witnessed, and then visits the inspector to get some information. We confirm with Inspector Chelmy that Dr. Stangun, the Prime Minister, and Stangun's assistants all vanished from the scene of the week prior. No remains, no clothing, pure disappearance. Layton convinces Chelmy to let him see the files on the older similar case, and after seeing whatever it is he was looking for, abruptly leaves after letting Chelmy know the Prime Minister is being held hostage in the future. What a shocking thing that must be to hear. This line of dialogue is fantastic. Chelmy, out of pure disbelief of Layton's claim, trails him back to the clock shop, as well as Flora, who he left behind at the professor's office. She's from the first game, who Layton is the legal guardian of now. This group of characters ends up in the future together as the shopkeep doesn't want to wait any longer, because he wants to be home for dinner. I guess time spent in the present is also time spent in the future if the wormhole's just adding 10 years to it. We meet the postman again, who tells them of future Luke's whereabouts, and they go to meet him. I'm going to fast forward a bit for the sake of time, but the group comes up with a plan to break into Chinatown, and it works, and they have a couple of obstacles to overcome before they can enter the pagoda. I love the Chinatown location. It's so intricately detailed and pretty to look at. It's a welcome difference from the future London aesthetic. At the pagoda, Layton runs off to do something and returns quickly. I love that Layton is given some agency here to run off from the player's point of view. It adds greatly to him being fleshed out already in this game. The pagoda segment is pretty neat. It carries a foreboding feeling that we're going to meet the future Layton, and at this point the time travel story is going to be put to the real test. The sense of solving puzzles placed to stop us by an evil Layton is a very intriguing one, and I love it. It feels like a finale, even though it's not. We get to the top of the tower, and there we have it. Evil Layton is obviously just Dr. Stangun. A lot has come undone by this revelation, and Layton owns this man so thoroughly with logic that he even gives Luke a puzzle to solve, which he then uses as a metaphor for how the time travel story just fell apart. Absolutely savage. Dr. Stongun, now revealed, has to come clean. He reveals that he was in love with Claire like Layton. She's the woman who Layton keeps seeing and having flashbacks about, and Stongun wants to save her from an accident that ended her life. Stongun needed to lure Layton here by running his name through the dirt because he wants to use data in his memory to build a wormhole to the moment Claire died. The time travel accident Layton witnessed was the one Claire died in. There's a really unintentionally funny part about this though. Having this small puzzle gizmo at the start of the tower end up being such a vital key to Stongun's plan made me laugh. I'm sorry, but the concept Stongun has of Layton as not being cautious of something if it's told it's a puzzle device is gold. So with the cat out of the bag, and I'm not talking about myself, Stongun traps Layton and the rest in the cage and seems to have won. But then the real Layton arrives. Remember earlier when Layton ran off to do something? The one we met up with ended up being Don Paulo, who's here because he teamed up with Layton and also was paid by Stongun to impersonate people in the future that we know from the present. Don Paulo messed up minor details in his Schrader disguise which Layton picked up and gave him the idea to team up with Paulo for this trick. Oh, and I guess that means that Gizmo plan is undone because it wasn't the real Layton. We hear more about this upon escaping the tower using an emergency exit intended for Stongun. Don Paulo, who was a cartoonish villain from the previous games, is now revealed to actually be a man named Paul from Layton's past, once a colleague in school and also in love with Claire. He was shocked that Claire chose Layton and vowed that Layton would pay. All of a sudden, even this strangely behaved man feels understandable emotionally. Anyways, we meet up again with Flora at the hotel since the group had to split up to escape the pagoda, and then we head to a spot by the river where Layton deduces the time machine research facility must connect through, based on the fact that all the scientists we've observed have wet pants. Could have been something else, but let's believe Layton here. We meet up with Don Paulo again, who's one step ahead of us here, and oh my god. His interactions with Luke are so funny. Just look at this. It genuinely made me laugh to see how much Luke gets on this guy's nerves. We infiltrate Stongun's time machine facility and find some scientists who give us key information. They aren't only working on the time machine, but they don't know what the second project is. We attempt to move on ahead to meet Stongun and run into a dead end. Luckily, it seems the woman who looks like Claire is here to help. She introduces herself as Celeste, Claire's identical sister, and she's been following Layton to see him get to the bottom of what happened to Claire, as she wants to know what happened to her too. Before we can talk more to her, the family goons arrive and we have to split up again and meet up at the Thames Arms restaurant. And now with everyone all together, the finale begins. You know the routine, let's have a tea break first. Alright, let's tackle this. Layton deduces at last that the time travel story is a fake, and the clock shop is actually a lift that descends into the ground. By convincing scientists Stongun has stolen from the surface that they've been sent 10 years into the future, he'd be able to goad them into working on his time machine project without having to force them, making them want to work on the machine as much as he does in order to get home. The bartender, upon hearing this, reveals himself to actually be Stongun in disguise, and he attempts to trap everyone here by claiming he planted mines everywhere, but Layton quickly sees through this and corners him. Now we can hear the story of Bill and Stongun, whose real name is Dimitri Allen. Allen and Hawks were colleagues in a lab studying time travel, and their machine was ready for human testing. Bill planned to use Claire, their lab assistant, as the test subject. Stongun realized there was a flaw in the machine, but unbeknownst to him, Bill was ready to run the experiment anyways, as a major company offered him an exorbitant sum to prove that the power source of the machine worked. Canceling the experiment would not only delay Bill's payday, but also probably disinterest the company. And at this point, we know what happens next. Layton brings to attention the elephant in the room now that the time travel story is properly blown apart. Future Luke is revealed by Layton to be a boy named Clive, whose parents perished in the blast radius of the original time machine accident, which seems to be what Layton visited the inspector earlier to discern. And let's hear this one from Layton himself.
Time to put together the pieces of your plan. But when I finally understood it all, the sheer evil of it sent a chill down my spine. Clive was aiming for revenge on a massive scale. And you were nothing more than a pawn, Dimitri. Reports indicate that 10 people were killed in the explosion, 2 of whom were your parents. When the initial shock wore off, it was replaced with anger. You became obsessed with exacting revenge on those who had wronged you. First, you befriended Dimitri and convinced him to resume his research on the time machine. Then, you used your inheritance to set up this elaborate facsimile of London. With your stage in place, you used your contacts in the press to find the best scientists in the country. However, unbeknownst to Dimitri, most of your staff were not working on the time machine.
What?
We don't have all day, Layton. What was the second project? A weapon designed to cause destruction on an unimaginable scale.
A weapon?
And I thought scientists were supposed to be observant. While you focused on your machine, I had a different goal. Though some may call it revenge, I prefer to think of it as justice over single-minded scientists and corrupt politicians.
What are you saying, Clive?
Enough explanations. Let me show you.
Move to higher ground!
Level with me here for a second. When I started this game, I had no earthly idea by the end of it we'd be facing a damn Metal Gear. Let alone that the time travel story was an enormous fake city built under the real London, which the giant machine is now going to attack. Clive's motivation for all of this is actually incredibly sound to me. He was wronged terribly by Bill Hawks, and the man got away with a powerful seat in the country and riches to rub salt in that wound. In real life, science sometimes does go wrong for the sake of profit, and people can be hurt by this. The Layton writers know what they're doing, though. An adult player who might have a knowledge of the history of corporate science might feel the real weight of this, while a child will just hate Bill Hawks for being a mean idiot. Clive isn't just someone who wants revenge. He is that. But more importantly, Clive is a victim of profit-driven science. London created him, and now he's come from the city's darkest depths to destroy it. This is insane. I'm sure even if you've never played this game and you don't know these characters, like, this is crazy, right? This is... To me, this is what good writing is. But anyways, let's wrap up the rest quickly. We save Flora and Bill Hawks with a flying car that Don Paulo whipped up for us, and then we save Clive too after we destroy his giant machine. The puzzles in this finale are so fun because it feels like we're actually doing all of this. We destroy Clive's robot with the gift Layton gave Claire on their dinner date, a pocket watch which Celeste held on to. After everyone's rescued from the underground fake London and the machine is blown up, Clive gets arrested and the Prime Minister Bill Hawks says this. He has zero self-awareness. None at all. All of this is his direct fault and it goes right over his head. But that's what someone in this position would realistically react with. The guilt of facing what he's done would be crushing. Now here's one last twist the game has to offer us. Dimitri and Bill's time machine worked. Claire was actually sent 10 years into the future from the blast, which is now, but unstably as the machine was incomplete. Celeste is Claire, but her time is up now and she must go.
I'm sorry, I can't stay. We had so many plans for the future. You won't forget, will you? Our shared past and our lost future.
You can't go! I don't want to say goodbye again. I can't, I won't!
I know you. And I know you'll stay strong. After all, that's what a gentleman does. I must go now, Herschel. Thank you for everything.
And there's the credits. The game has a post-credits scene where we see Layton seeing Luke off as he moves to America, and we see Layton look out the window with his hat off. The significance of Layton without his hat is not that he's moved on from Claire, but rather that he's no longer letting it shape his personality. By the end of this game, Layton is a flesh and blood person, fleshed out, three-dimensional. You feel like this is no longer just a mascot character for puzzle games. And Luke turns American. He got the short end of the stick. The new Professor Layton game is going to kick off from the end of this original trilogy, so now you're all ready for it. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. Love all of you. See you next time.